Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a deep dive into a new topic each week. And today we're going to be taking a deep dive into ancient Carthage.
That's right. We're going back in time to the Punic Wars era, a time of great empires, epic battles, and political intrigue. And we're going to be focusing on one specific event that really captures the drama and the complexity of this period, the Battle of the Bagradas River.
Yeah, the Battle of the Bagradas River in 240 BC, it's kind of a hidden gem in ancient history. Not as well known as, say, the Battle of Cannae or the Siege of Syracuse, but it's a fascinating story full of twists and turns, and it really highlights the strategic brilliance of one of Carthage's most famous generals.
You're talking about Hamilcar Barca, right? The father of Hannibal Barca, the guy who would later become Rome's worst nightmare.
Exactly, Hamilcar Barca, a name that still echoes through the halls of military history. But before we get into the battle itself and Hamilcar's role in it, we need to understand the context, the background, the why, and the how of this whole conflict.
All right, we need to talk about the Mercenary War because the Battle of the Bagradas River was just one episode in this larger conflict. A war that pitted Carthage against its own soldiers and allies, a real case of the empire striking back.
It's like that moment when you realize you've been accidentally putting salt in your coffee instead of sugar for weeks, just a complete and utter mess. And for Carthage, this mess was the result of a series of bad decisions, financial troubles, and political turmoil, all coming together at the worst possible time.
So let's break it down. The First Punic War between Carthage and Rome had just ended, and Carthage had lost badly. They had to pay a huge indemnity to Rome. They lost control of key territories like Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia, and their economy was in shambles.
Imagine being in charge of the Carthaginian treasury at that point, like trying to balance a checkbook after a month-long shopping spree in ancient Rome.
Yeah.
It's not a pretty picture.
Not at all. And to make matters worse, the Carthaginian government now had to deal with the issue of paying their soldiers, many of whom were mercenaries from various parts of the Mediterranean who had fought for them during the war.
These guys were expected to get paid. They had risked their lives. They had been away from their families for years, and they wanted their due reward.
But Carthage, being broke and probably a little bit arrogant, decided to try and haggle with these battle-hardened mercenaries. They offered them a reduced payment, hoping to save some money.
It's like going to a Michelin star restaurant, ordering the most expensive dish, and then trying to negotiate a discount with the waiter after you finished eating. It's not going to go well.
And it didn't go well at all. The mercenaries felt betrayed, they felt disrespected, and they were in no mood for compromises, so they mutinied, they rebelled, and they sparked a conflict that would threaten to tear Carthage apart from the inside out.
It's like that saying goes, if you owe the bank $1,000, you have a problem. But if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank has a problem. Except in this case, Carthage owed thousands of angry mercenaries a lot of money, and it was Carthage that had a very big problem.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a minor dispute. It was a full-blown rebellion with thousands of heavily armed and experienced soldiers led by some very capable leaders. Guys like Spendius, a Roman slave who had escaped and joined the mercenaries, and Mathos, a Libyan who had a personal grudge against Carthage.
They were a motley crew, these rebels, a mix of different nationalities, backgrounds, and motivations, but they were united by their anger, their sense of injustice, and their desire to make Carthage pay for its mistakes.
And initially, it seemed like they might actually succeed. They quickly gained control of large parts of Carthage's African territories. They besieged key cities. They even blockaded Carthage itself, cutting off its supply lines and causing widespread panic.
Imagine being a wealthy Carthaginian merchant at that point. Like, all your trade routes are disrupted, your warehouses are empty, and you're starting to run out of fancy imported olives. It's a nightmare.
It was a chaotic time, and Carthage's initial response to this rebellion was led by a general named Hanno, who, to put it mildly, wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed.
He was like that friend who always volunteers to drive, but then gets lost every time, even with the GPS.
Hanno made a series of blunders. He underestimated the rebels, he made poor strategic decisions, and he missed opportunities to crush them when he had the chance.
It was like watching a comedy of errors unfold, except with very high stakes and a lot of potential for bloodshed.
And this is where Hamilcar Barca enters the scene. He's called upon to save the day, to restore order, and to put down this rebellion that's threatening to destroy Carthage from within.
Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader, and a man who knows how to exploit every advantage on the battlefield. And this brings us to the Battle of the Bagradas River, the moment where Hamilcar's cunning and his understanding of the terrain would truly shine.
The Bagradas River, it's a key strategic point in this conflict. It flows through the heart of Carthage's territory, and the rebels had control of a crucial bridge in the lower part of the river, blocking Carthage's access westward.
It's like they had set up a toll booth on the only road out of town, and they were charging an arm and a leg to pass.
And the rebels, they thought they had Hamilcar and his forces trapped. They were confident they could defeat him. They were eager to crush the Carthaginian army and claim victory.
But they underestimated Hamilcar's resourcefulness, his willingness to think outside the box, and his ability to use the environment to his advantage.
They overlooked a seemingly insignificant feature of the Bagradas River, a sandbar, a shallow stretch of sand that would become the key to Hamilcar's audacious plan.
Ah, the sandbar, the unsung hero of this battle, the secret weapon that would turn the tide of war. But before we reveal how Hamilcar used this sandy surprise to his advantage, let's take a closer look at the armies themselves, the men who would clash on this ancient battlefield.
So we've got our armies facing off across this river, and the rebels are feeling pretty confident. They've got the numbers, they've got the position, and they think they've got Hamilcar right where they want him.
But Hamilcar is not one to play by the rules. He's always thinking a few steps ahead, and he's got a plan up his sleeve, a plan that involves that sandbar we mentioned earlier.
Right. That seemingly insignificant sandbar is about to become the linchpin of Hamilcar's strategy, and it all hinges on a bit of geographical luck.
Oh, yeah, tell us about that, because I love a bit of geographical determinism in my ancient battles.
Well, the Bagradas River, you see, it's not just a river. It's a river that's influenced by the tides and the winds, and at this particular time, there's a strong easterly wind blowing.
Okay, so the wind is pushing the water.
It's pushing the water back, creating a shallow passage, a ford, if you will, right near where that sandbar is. And Hamilcar, he knows this. He's studied the terrain, he's observed the patterns of the river, and he's ready to exploit this knowledge to his advantage.
So he's not just a brilliant military strategist. He's also a bit of a geographer, a meteorologist, maybe even a bit of a shaman communing with the spirits of the river.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but he's definitely a man who understands the importance of knowing your environment, of reading the signs and adapting to the circumstances. And this is where his plan starts to take shape.
So tell us, what does Hamilcar do?
He waits for nightfall under the cover of darkness. He quietly marches his army down to the mouth of the river, to that spot where the sandbar is exposed and the water is shallow.
And the rebels, they have no idea what's going on.
They're upriver near that bridge, completely oblivious to Hamilcar's movements. They're probably celebrating their supposed victory, drinking wine, boasting about their exploits, completely unaware that the tables are about to turn.
It's like that scene in a heist movie where the thieves think they've got away with the loot, but the detective is already waiting for them at the airport.
Exactly. And while the rebels are busy partying, Hamilcar's troops are wading across the river, their feet sinking into the soft sand, the water lapping at their knees. It must have been a surreal sight, a silent army crossing under the moonlight.
Talk about a stealth operation. This is like ancient special forces stuff. No night vision goggles, no satellite imagery, just pure cunning and a bit of local knowledge.
And the element of surprise is crucial to Hamilcar's plan because as dawn breaks the rebels, they're still expecting a frontal assault at the bridge. They're preparing for a head-on clash, but instead,
They get a nasty surprise.
they find themselves surrounded by a fresh and well-rested Carthaginian army that has seemingly appeared out of nowhere. It's a moment of pure shock and disarray. For the rebels, their formations are broken, their plans are in ruins, and their confidence is shattered.
It's like showing up to a boxing match and realizing you've accidentally wandered into a cage fight. You're completely outmatched and outmaneuvered.
And to make matters worse for the rebels, Hamilcar has brought his secret weapon to the party, the war elephants.
Ah, yes, the war elephants. Those magnificent beasts of war. The ancient world's equivalent of tanks, except a lot more unpredictable and a lot more likely to cause collateral damage.
Imagine you're a rebel scouter. You've just recovered from the shock of being outflanked, trying to regroup, and then you hear this earth-shaking rumble. You look up and you see these massive, shadowy figures lumbering towards you, their tusks glinting in the morning sun, their ears flapping like giant sails.
It must have been a terrifying sight, like facing a stampede of woolly mammoths.
The Carthaginian cavalry, led by Hamilcar himself, charges into the fray, their javelins raining down on the disoriented rebels, while the war elephants crash through the enemy lines, scattering soldiers like bowling pins.
The rebels, they don't stand a chance. They're completely routed. They break ranks, they flee in terror, and the Battle of the Bagradas River turns into a bloody massacre.
It's a decisive victory for Hamilcar and a crushing defeat for the rebels. Thousands are killed. Thousands more are captured, and the rebellion suffers a blow from which it will never fully recover.
But as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, this victory comes at a cost because the Mercenary War is far from over, and the brutality that we've seen on display here at the Bagradas River is just a taste of what's to come.
Well, we left off with Hamilcar standing victorious on the banks of the Bagradas River. But as we all know, in history and especially in war, things are rarely that simple.
Yeah, a victory is just a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean the war is over.
Right.
It just means you've won a battle. And in the case of the Mercenary War, this victory at the Bagradas River was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would be even more brutal and even more complex.
The rebels, despite the setback, they weren't finished. They still had a lot of fight left in them. And they were led by some predetermined individuals, guys like Mathos and Spendius, who weren't going to just give up their dreams of freedom and autonomy that easily.
It's like that moment when you think you finally killed the boss in a video game, but then it transforms into a giant monster with even more health bars and deadlier attacks.
Exactly. The Mercenary War, it was far from over, and it would drag on for another 3 long and bloody years, a period marked by shifting alliances, guerrilla warfare, sieges, betrayals, atrocities on both sides.
It was a messy conflict, a real quagmire, and Hamilcar, he found himself having to adapt to this new reality to fight a war that wasn't just about pitched battles and strategic maneuvers, but also about winning hearts and minds, about securing resources, and about maintaining the loyalty of his own troops.
And this is where we see Hamilcar's true brilliance as a leader, because he doesn't just rely on military force, he also uses diplomacy, propaganda, and even psychological warfare to undermine the rebels and to strengthen his own position.
It's like he's playing a game of chess, except the board is constantly changing, the pieces are moving on their own, and there are hidden players trying to sabotage him at every turn.
But Hamilcar, he's a master of this game. He's always thinking a few moves ahead, and he's always willing to take risks to achieve his goals.
So give us some examples of how he used these other tactics, these non-military strategies, to gain an advantage in this war.
Well, for example, he realized that the rebels, they relied heavily on the support of the local population. They needed food supplies, shelter, and recruits to sustain the rebellion. So Hamilcar, he made a point of treating the civilians in the areas he conquered with respect and fairness. He offered them amnesty, he provided them with food, and he tried to win them over to his side.
It's like that old saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, except in this case, Hamilcar is trying to catch rebels with kindness.
And it worked to some extent. He was able to sow discord among the rebels, to create divisions, and to undermine their support base.
Divide and conquer, a classic tactic.
Indeed, and Hamilcar, he also used propaganda, he spread rumors, he exaggerated his victories, he played up the rebels' brutality, and he portrayed himself as the savior of Carthage, the only one who could restore peace and order.
It's like the ancient world's version of a spin doctor shaping the narrative to his advantage.
And he even used psychological warfare. There's this one story where he captures a group of rebel soldiers, and instead of killing them, he sends them back to their camp with their hands cut off.
That's brutal.
It is, but it's also a calculated move. It's meant to terrorize the rebels, to demoralize them, to make them question their loyalty, and it's a tactic that Hamilcar uses repeatedly throughout the war.
War is a nasty business. It brings out the worst in people.
It does, and the Mercenary War, it was no exception. It was a brutal conflict, a fight for survival, and both sides were willing to do whatever it took to win.
So how does it all end?
Well, after 3 years of fighting the rebels, they're exhausted, their resources are depleted, and their morale is shattered. And Hamilcar, he finally manages to trap them in a valley near a town called Leptis Parva.
It's the final showdown, the climax of this long and bloody conflict.
It is. And the rebels, they're outnumbered, they're outmaneuvered, and they're out of options. So they surrender, hoping for some kind of leniency from Hamilcar.
And Hamilcar, he's not in a forgiving mood.
He's not. He's seen the brutality of the rebels firsthand. He's lost friends and comrades, and he's determined to make sure that this rebellion never happens again. So he orders the execution of the rebel leaders, Mathos and Spendius and thousands of their followers.
It's a bloodbath, a brutal end to a brutal war.
It is, and it marks the end of the Mercenary War, a victory for Carthage, but a victory that has come at a great cost.
Thousands dead, the economy in ruins and deep scars that will take generations to heal.
The Mercenary War, it's a reminder of the fragility of empires, of the dangers of internal divisions, and of the brutal realities of ancient warfare.
It's a story full of intrigue, betrayal, and bloodshed, but it's also a story that highlights the importance of leadership, of adaptability, and the will to survive.
And as we wrap up our deep dives into the Mercenary War, we hope you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of ancient Carthage and that you've learned something along the way.
And if you're ever in a situation where you need to outsmart your enemies, remember the lessons of Hamilcar Barca. Study the terrain, think outside the box, and don't underestimate the power of a well-placed sandbar.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration of history's hidden depths.